Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of the We Love Sports Movies podcast. I'm your host, Matt Blaustein. I'm joined here today by my co-host, Jacob Aframian.
Hey, Matt, how you doing? Glad to be back for our second episode of the We Love Sports Movies podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Moneyball, a personal favorite of mine, and I'm really excited.
Jacob's been wanting to cover this ever since we came up with the idea for this podcast. You want to tell him why you love it so much?
Yeah. So Moneyball is it's really, as I said 2 seconds ago, it's a personal favorite of mine. I saw this movie. It came out in 2011. It came out in the fall of 2011, around that time. And for me, I remember seeing it with my family, not knowing too much about the story, but a big baseball fan at the time. And I just remember watching Brad Pitt, who plays Billy B, and he's the lead. And I was just so captivated by his performance because I just thought that he was super cool. That was the main thing. I remember when I was done with that movie, I remember saying to myself, when I was thinking about Brad Pitt, I'm like, that guy is cool. And I didn't even know how big of a star he was at the time. I just knew that he was the lead in Moneyball. I had no idea that he was one of the 5 biggest acting stars on the planet. And for me, it was just it's a great story also. Even though I'm a Yankee fan, it almost made me root for the A's at times, even though they were going up against the Yankees, because I would feel bad. Along with, I just think the cast is great. Obviously, we have Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Robin Wright. We have, as I said, with the story. We also have, what I love about this movie also is that it's a great blend of seriousness and a lot of subtle humor. It's not like they're really trying to be funny, but it's it will get a smirk out of your face because it's a very subtle humor and it's fun to watch.
Yeah, of course. I personally love this movie. I wouldn't put it on the pedestal as Jake has as the best movie he's ever seen, sports movie, but I really enjoyed this. I remember going to see this movie when it came out in theaters with friends, and I'm not going to lie, I wasn't a huge baseball fan, but within the first 10 minutes, I was captivated. The cinematography is gorgeous. Brad Pitt is insanely good in this movie. This is the first movie that I actually saw Jonah Hill in, which is crazy because I thought that he was a serious actor until a few years later when I saw 21 Jump Street and I realized he wasn't. But Jonah Hill is amazing. I think that my favorite thing about this movie, honestly, is the cinematography. I think that so many of the shots in this movie are absolutely beautiful, and so many of the choices that the director made in this movie are just absolutely insane. Yeah.
Yeah, directed by Bennett Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the cinematography is really great. I think there's a lot of great shots, a lot of great views of the field. I think they did a really great job of that, and I don't think it's talked about enough. I don't remember if it got nominated for cinematography Oscar, but I think that I think it's an underrated aspect of this movie. I definitely agree with you on that.
I will tell you right now if it was named for a cinematography Oscar. Give me 1 second. Okay, so it was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, and those included Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actor for Brad Pitt, and Best Supporting Actor for Jonah Hill. And Jacob's still a little bit bitter about that because he believes that this should have won Best Picture instead of The Artist. Even though I personally think The Artist deserved that win, he tends to disagree.
I mean, The Artist, come on. I mean, no one saw that movie. I mean, this is Brad Pitt.
I saw it in a multimedia class. It was great.
Yeah, you did, but you and whoever else was in your class, there was only a handful of people that even saw that damn movie. I mean, this is Brad Pitt we're talking here. The reason I think it didn't win is because people oh, it's a sports movie. So, you ever read sports movies like A $1 Million Baby won an Oscar. And that's a boxing movie.
Yeah.
But, the Academy, they want to be annoying in many ways over the years. So there's not much you can do.
So I don't think we gave an appropriate backstory to what this movie is. This movie is about the Oakland Athletics after the 2001 American League Division Series when they lost to the Yankees. The general manager of the Athletics is learning that all his players are being signed by more big league teams, more bigger market teams the Yankees and the Red Sox.
The A's, the problem with the A's, I don't mean to interrupt you, it's just the A's, they just don't have a large salary. They're a small market team. They play in Oakland. It's not a big market. And as a result, they have a small market salary. They just don't have a lot of money to pay these great players. That's why it's so important for them to, have a great farm system and find these, diamonds in the rough so that they can develop them so no one else gets their hands on them before they hit free agency. And that's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's just a great movie because the whole story is basically the beginning of analytics in baseball because you have this prodigy, Peter Brand, who joins forces with Brad Pitt's character, Billy Bean, and they kind of just make up their whole goal is we're not looking for great players. We're looking for a great team that will help boost each other and build them up. So ideas of on-base percentage.
Yeah, they are obsessed with on-base
They're
percentage.
obsessed with it. They pretty much, if he gets on base more than the other person, they get him, even if he's the worst player overall. They don't care about fielding. They care about on-base percentage. It's really a more offensive-oriented scheme than you'd usually see on a baseball team. But I think it's absolutely fascinating, the story. I remember when this movie actually came out, the general manager of the New York Giants at the time, Jerry Reese, came out and he's like, "Oh, I deserve a Moneyball movie myself. Look how I've led the Giants to 2 Super Bowls."
Hold on.
Yeah, did you not know the story?
No, I didn't.
Right after this movie came out, Jerry Reese was like, "Oh, they made a Moneyball about him. I think I need a Moneyball about me. I assembled this amazing team." And then the Giants had losing records every single year after they made it to the Super Bowl.
Okay.
And Jerry Reese was fired. And then Tom Coughlin left. So, yeah, Jacob, you're trying to hold your tongue here, but I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Okay. I'm going to do my very best to not lose my mind right now because, Jerry Reese, let's think about this. 2007, you did not build that team. You just tagged along at the very end because Ernie Accorsi was old and he retired. You did not build. You built like 20% of that team. So the credit that you take is minimal. 2011, yes, I will give you credit. And as a Giants fan, I was very happy to win that Super Bowl. It was a great day. But I guess I know where he's coming from because the Giants for years were a very frugal team in free agency. They didn't like giving a lot of big money to people, which is one of Jerry Reese's problems. I'd be like screaming. I'm like, please, this is why we're terrible. Just give me a big free agency signing. And he was like, no.
I can discredit Jerry Reese's need for a Moneyball movie based on 4 words alone. They signed Matt Dodge.
Yeah. Drafted Matt Dodge.
Oh, drafted him too. Yeah, there we go.
6th-round pick. Worst punter of all time, hasn't punted a ball since.
Exactly. And that Deshaun Jackson punt is the most infamous thing.
Talk about horrible memories as a Giants fan. But yeah, Jerry Reese does not deserve any movie. And if it's a movie it's about Jerry Reese, it should not be very flattering. Because for a guy that was a part of 2 Super Bowl winning teams, he did, diddly poo after that. I mean, he did nothing. And that's why he lost his job. But unfortunately, the Giants hired a guy named Dave Gettleman who's, it's like Dumb and Dumber.
Dave the Goat Gettleman.
But if I don't want to talk about Dave Gettleman because if I do, we're going to be here all day. So let's get back to
so let's get into the movie a little bit. Let's get into a few scenes that we wanted to pick. Personally, I want to start with the opening scene naturally because I think that's where it really starts to show the amazing cinematography that happens in this movie. So you want to talk about the opening scene a little bit before I talk about it?
Yeah, so the opening scene, it goes right to the last game of the division series. I'll be honest, I don't remember how many games it was.
I believe it was game 5. No, it was game 4 because they said get sweeped.
Yeah. So
game 4.
What would be get sweeped? And this is the division round, so it wasn't like the wild card.
Clarify if I'm thinking wrong. Was this the same game with the Jeremy Giambi, Derek Jeter flip? I feel like it was.
No, because they were at that game was in Oakland. So it wasn't. He's in Oakland listening to the game. He's listening to the game at Yankee Stadium. He's not even there because he has like this thing that we'll get into later about not wanting to watch the game live. And
I won't tell you when the flip happened.
Yeah.
Oh, the flip happened in game 3 of that series. So the game right 3. Before it.
Yeah. So Billy's listening to the game on the radio in Oakland in an empty stadium, and he's just like he has like this look on his face where he's just like in despair. Because he knows, the season's over and they're going to lose Johnny Damon, Jason Isringhausen, and Jason Giambi, who are all integral parts of the Athletics team, the free agency.
And I want to point out,
I
want to point out, interestingly enough, that they lost to the Yankees, and within about a 5-year span, the Yankees got 2 of the 3 players that they let go. So they got both Damon and Giambi. And I remember when I was younger, I love Johnny Damon on the Yankees.
Oh, me too. I was a huge Johnny Damon fan.
Yeah,
when he left after 2009, I was very sad.
I was beside myself. It was awful, yeah.
Yeah. But, it worked out fine.
Mm-hmm.
And, that whole scene, Oh no, you go. Whatever you say.
Yeah, so I want to just say a little bit about the cinematography in that scene because I think that that was absolutely fascinating because it kind of sets the tone for the entire movie. It starts out with a quote. I forgot what the quote was. It was something about success and like building a
Yeah.
team.
Oh
Um,
God, I forgot. Oh well,
but there was a quote at the
forgot it.
beginning, and then it just opens up with a text thing. I think it was like October 15th, 2001, and it was
Yeah,
you know ALDS Yankees versus Athletics. And I think the way that they did directing and the splicing for this intro is something that would be worth an Oscar alone. I'm shocked that they didn't get any Oscars for
yeah,
this movie.
yeah,
But the way that they start it, where it's like they have a cut into like almost a grainy footage of the game itself, and then it cuts to you know two money. It's like two salaries, and one of them's like 124 million on top, and it's versus
32
300.
million or
No,
whatever.
it was 39 million.
Oh my
Yeah, it
bad,
was
39
39
million.
million under. And then just very slowly reveals the names. And it's New York Yankees on top, and it's Oakland Athletics on the bottom. And I think that that was absolutely fascinating because they cut from that, and then they show the rest of it, and it's like all the Yankee Stadium fans, and they're like get sweeped Athletics and all that, and then it cuts to the title, and then you just see Billy Bean sitting there, and he's
Yeah,
just sitting there, and he's quiet, and then he goes to they cut to the stadium, and he's sitting in the stadium, and they have like a bit of a wraparound shot, and then they cut to him in his car, and then he starts pounding the wheel in
yeah, he's
frustration,
breaking. But yeah, he's breaking his
breaking
radio.
breaking his radio,
Throws it out
threw
the
it out into the
window.
road. Yeah, I think that was a fascinating intro, not just for the movie, but for the character of Billy Bean, because it's very clear that he's sick of losing and sick of
Yeah,
being cut down by the restraint of
yeah,
being on a small market team like the Athletics,
yeah,
which comes into play like throughout the entire movie. That's like the kind of the
yeah,
whole plot point. It's him kind of struggling with the small market team having that low salary.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to the next scene. Talk
Okay. So
about
what's the next scene you want to talk about?
next thing I want to talk about is the first meeting. It's like an end of the season meeting that Billy Bean has with all the rest of the scouts in the A's department and the A's
Absolutely.
franchise. They have like a big meeting in this room. I think there's probably some coaches there too, where they just talk about the plan for the off season. And what's weird is that the way they talk about the players, they talk about them like based off of like, oh, this guy, he's got, they're talking about almost it's like they care more about the ticket sales and
It's. I
how do
think
I put this?
I know how to put it.
Yeah,
Essentially, the scouts are judging them less on talent and more on aesthetic, and
yeah,
how they fit within the team.
bingo, exactly.
And Billy Bean's kind of like, what the hell is
Yeah,
happening here? We're
he's sitting
losing.
there. He's like, what am I doing? What
Like
the
the
heck
dude,
is going
one of the
on?
coaches is like Fabio because
Yeah,
it's
he's
like
like,
oh, it's a funky name, but like
he's
because
like,
they're trying to keep their whole aesthetic of the team. And Billy Bean is sitting there, and he's like, why are they worrying about an aesthetic and not wins? We
yeah,
just lost three of our three best players to free agency because we have no money, and they can't hire anyone. So I believe that this is a really like this kind of just shows the entire organization because it shows all the scouts are like kind of refusing. They're old crotchety white guys.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah. Yeah. I just think that in that scene, it's just like it shows like the old versus the young. And even though Billy's not super young, he's a lot younger than most of his scouts. They're all like I said, old white guys.
hmm
And it's like he's trying to do things the new way, and they're trying to stick to like their guns. Like we know what we're doing. Leave us alone. We'll figure this out. And what he's trying to always tell them, it's like stop trying to replace people that we know you can't replace. So let's just build it with what we have, and stop getting into all these stupid fantasies that just aren't worth my time. That's basically what he's saying to them, and it
yeah.
just shows like the power that he has. Even though there's obviously this guy named Grady, I think his name Grady something, and he thinks he should be the GM. That's pretty clear and obvious throughout the
Essentially,
movie.
he looks like I think I didn't do any research into him specifically, but something
Yeah,
about his character gives off the vibe that he was set to be it because he's probably been
yeah,
with the organization for a while and he's
yeah,
older. And then Billy Bean was hired,
yeah.
and there's got to be some like
Yeah,
there's got
yeah,
to be some bad blood there. Also,
yeah. There's
I'm trying to
definitely bad
remember
blood.
who the actor was because I have a
Oh
feeling
God,
'cause I
I
think I
don't
know who
remember.
it is
He
because I
wouldn't. He wouldn't worth my time because he's too disrespectful. Billy and
yeah
Billy, but I don't really care. He's funny. He kind of looks like Nick Saban or something like that.
I didn't see him as Nick Saban. I thought he was. I'm not sure you know this, but movie Nightmare on Elm Street. I think John Saxon, who plays the dad of the main character, of the girl main
Oh,
character,
that's
um,
interesting.
I think that's who I thought it was, but it turns out
Yeah.
not to be him. But I think
But yeah,
that
anyway.
anyway, yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
hmm Okay, so you want to go on to the next scene?
Next scene that we want to talk about is the scene where Billy Bean he goes to Cleveland to try and I guess negotiate some trades. He basically he also asks them for like money, like and you think oh wait why would he ask them for money? He asks them for money because sometimes in trades you go like you get a certain amount of dollars in return as
hmm
like an add-on bonus, and he's trying to like work on deals face to face instead of over the phone like the GMs usually do. And then along with that, in the process, he meets a guy named Peter Brand, played by Jonah Hill, who he sees and he said, "Wait a minute, because he realized that this guy navigated trade, and he cracks down on him. He's like, why'd you do that? Like, what did you see that it wouldn't work?" And then he tells him, and then he realizes that he finds like this super smart guy from Yale, who's a prodigy with his baseball mind, and he hires him. He's like, he's like, I want to hire you. And it's like they were like he was like first job in baseball, and then Peter was like first job ever.
I think it's very interesting to point out that Peter Brandt isn't a real person. He never
Really?
existed. I just looked it up.
Wow.
Peter Brandt is based off of Paul DePodesta.
Oh,
And if you know who that is,
I know who
but
that is.
I know who it is though. He
Yeah.
is a former American football executive and baseball executive. He's the current chief strategy officer for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, he's been heavily scrutinized over the years.
He's been heavily scrutinized. And when the scrutiny kind of started, it was because he was Peter Brandt in real life, and he was actually hired by Bean to input sabermetrics, which is what the whole analytics became. But after the book came out, which was written by Michael Lewis, and I'm not sure if they named him in the book or they just renamed him Peter Brand.
Yeah,
he got known as a cold and calculating human being who really only judged people based on stats. I think that he's absolutely fascinating, though. I feel like this is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I just don't understand why they would make up a character and just not stick with it.
I think why? Because the movie came about 8 years after the book was published, and DePodesta did not like that he was like named.
Really?
That's what happened.
Really?
Because what happened was DePodesta did not feel comfortable in the spotlight. I'm reading from Wikipedia. After the book's release, nor did he care for the secrets revealed about his scouting methods. The book earned DePodesta a reputation as a cold calculator, choosing players based only on their numbers. In addition, he was thought of as a guy who knew nothing of real baseball. But in reality, DePodesta played football in college and wanted to be a football coach. He graduated from Harvard with a degree in economics. He became an intern for the CFL's Baltimore Stallions in 1995. In 1996, he got his first baseball job with the Cleveland Indians, and he worked as a scout there. And he became the assistant to the general manager in October 1998. And he was hired by Bean not in 2001, but in November 1998.
Wow. So yeah, that's an example of a movie where it's all based on true story. They exaggerate some of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah, that's important because
I think that's fascinating because I actually
I had no idea about that either.
Yeah.
That was, breaking news to me.
Yeah.
All right, next scene we want to talk about is a scene where basically I think it's a scene with Billy, and he has a meeting with the scouts again, and Peter's there, and they have a whole list of players to evaluate for them. And they're like, who do you want to look at first, Billy, on our chart that we organized for you? And then he just goes, none of them. And that's like the ultimate disrespect. You have all these players lined up for your GM. You're just doing their job, and he just doesn't want to discredit you. He wants to totally discredit you. And then he talks about all these guys that are like, quote-unquote, defective players, as the guys put it out there. And he talks about, Jeremy Giambi, Scott Hatterberg, and Chad Bradford, I think.
Chad Bradford.
Like the pitcher. And they're all like, wait, who? They're like, why do you want to sign these guys who stink? Basically, that's what they're saying. They're all defective. They're not that good. And he saw something in all of them. And he was right on probably, 2 out of the 3 of them. And, he Pete's there, and he like the other Scott's like, who the heck is that guy? He's just like they probably think of him as just like some, chubby nerd who like, he's good at statistics or something because he's like doing all the math in his head. And that's important because it leads to, just more scouting of the players. And it leads to them in the next scene going to Scott Hatterberg's house. Unless you want to talk about that scene at all.
I don't really think there's much to talk about Scott Hatterberg scene. Or are you asking me about the scene where they're judging all the players?
You know what? Yeah, I was like thinking about we transitioned to the Scott Hambrick scene,
So
but
yeah, the Scott Hatter. I think I want to talk a little bit of the Scott Hatterberg scene. I don't know about you,
you can
because
talk about it.
I think something interesting about this movie. First of all, is that this is the real first serious role that Chris Pratt ever got.
It's
This
an
was the
interesting point.
beginning. This was the beginning of Chris Pratt kind of taking over Hollywood, because before this he was mainly known as a comedy actor on Parks and Rec. He didn't have much, like, no one thought he had actual acting chops. He plays the perfect example of like someone who's down on their luck and then, like, finally gets a big break. I feel like that's something that's very consistent with all the characters that he plays in his movies. But anyways, the Scott Hatterberg scene is great because it kind of gives almost a personal feeling, and it kind of shows that it shows a big contrast between Hatterberg and Bean, because Hatterberg is a family man. He's always there for his daughter. His wife is counting bills when Billy Bean comes over and calls him and says, "Yeah, we're outside. Let us in." Whereas Bean shows no emotion. He doesn't show any emotion actually until the end of the film, but we're going to save that for later. But I feel like Hatterberg is kind of shows like humanity in a way. He kind of represents humanity in a film that really has almost a lack of it. It's mainly almost all about analytics, and it's very hard to find any real humanity or heart or thoughtfulness in this entire movie. And Hatterberg, this is the first scene that we get some.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. All right,
Yeah.
let's go to the next scene.
Okay.
So I think the next thing I want to get into is it's like a short part where first I put in this part where like Billy, he throws a chair out of his office, and it's like you just don't see it coming. Just like it's like Bobby Knight, it's just like throws the chair out of nowhere. And it just like hits the wall, and you're like, what? You're like shocked. So it was like a huge bang you hear. I honestly I can't remember exactly what it was about. I don't know. I don't know if it was like, because I remember it was that, and then there was part where Pete just tells him it's like Pena over Hatterberg, and he just flips the desk, in his room, and he just gets so angry.
Yeah.
But that leads to the part where he's with his daughter Casey, played by Karis Dorsey, and they're like, they're like having ice cream together, and she gets worried about his job security, because she's like hearing stuff that she knows that the A's, they're not doing well yet. They're still struggling.
But she doesn't hear it just anywhere. She hears it on the internet, and that leads Billy Bean to say,
"Yeah,
don't go on the internet."
Yeah, he says, "What? Where'd you hear that?" And he's like, "I look at stuff sometimes." And then he goes like, "Well, don't go on the internet or read newspapers or talk to people." Which I think I love that so much, because it's funny in this stage. It's funny you hear that now. Imagine that. It's funny you hear that then. Imagine that now in the age of social media, with so much about like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and this is before all that even happened. So just imagine that now. It's just nuts.
Yeah, I feel like this is an absolutely fascinating conversation, because again, as I said earlier, there's not a lot of humanness in this movie. There's not a lot of humanity. I feel like Hatterberg, Scott Hatterberg, shows some of it. There's not a lot of emotion from anyone besides anger from anybody besides Hatterberg or Billy Bean's daughter. I feel like this is you get kind of a glimpse of Billy Bean, and I think as flashbacks start to begin, it kind of just shows that he's grown very cold at this point. Like, he's not like outwardly rude or anything, but like he's almost cold and calculated. Like the phrasing of like what they call a cold and calculated serial killer. Billy Bean kind of gives off that intimidation factor. But the difference between them and him is that he's not out to be a bad person. He just is very incapable of emotions because he has so much shut down inside of him.
He just wants to do his job. He's very guarded.
Exactly.
He's like coming off a divorce. He's having to be a co-parent with his ex-wife, and he has a daughter, and she's like in a adolescent stage where she's about to go off to college soon and stuff like that. Yeah. And it's like, he's juggling a lot of stuff along with a very, complicated and hard job.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see that dynamic as well. All right. I think the next scene we're going to talk about is a scene where it's an A's loss, and Billy's around, and he doesn't watch the games, which is funny. He doesn't really watch the games. He likes to like work out. Instead, he just for some reason is like watching the games, which we'll talk about maybe a little later. But after a game, the A's lose. They're at home, and he's walking around, and then the media's right by the locker room. But he hears music, and he's like, Well, and it's like a
Who the
joyous
hell is
music.
playing music after they
Yeah,
lose? Yeah.
and then he storms in the locker room. He goes past all the reporters, and he sees Jeremy Giambi like dancing, like in front of like a lot of the team, and he's like, it's almost like he's having a party, and he's looking at him. He has like this mean like look where he's so angry and he just wants to scream at him, but he doesn't. He goes another route where he grabs the bat and he breaks the stereo, and then he goes like, get up, and he goes like, he's losing. He starts going like, is losing fun? And he goes like, he's losing fun, the guy. And then Jeremy Jam goes like, no. And he does this whole thing where he goes like, what you having fun for? And then he just like, he slams the bat down like the locker room, and he hears this noise, and he goes like, that's losing sounds like. And the sound is absolute silence, because he's like, why in the heck or the hell are you celebrating? We just lost. And it's not like they're like, it's like one loss and like a, I mean, regardless, you should never be celebrating after a loss like that. That's just like inexcusable behavior. And that was a lot of that's also like an old guard Billy Bean thing where he played, so he knows. It's like, he's like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? It's like, no fun. You're not supposed to be having fun after that.
Yeah. No, I don't really have much to add to that scene. Other than the fact that like Jeremy Giambi's character in this movie, it just reminds me so much of this kid that I went to high school with. And like he was super lax and like really didn't care much about any of it. Where it was hard for him to kind of be serious after anything. If you're watching, Phil, I miss you. Hit me up. But I don't really have much to say about the scene, other than this leads to like where. Do you want to talk about the next scene where he starts doing trades and all this stuff?
Yeah, but I just think I just want to add one more thing about Jeremy Giambi. I just think it's hilarious how his two claims to fame, that he's Jason Giambi's brother, and that he was the one that got thrown out by Derek Jeter on that flip.
Exactly. Jeremy Giambi has no legacy.
That's the only thing that anyone ever remembers Jeremy Giambi for, and then like just being a bit of a disappointing athlete.
Yeah.
Especially when he's in the shadow of his brother, who's an incredible hitter. The Groits, but he was an incredible hitter. So, the next scene I want to talk about some of the trade deadline stuff where Billy is literally getting rid of the best players, on the team that have been performing, and like Carlos Pena, who at the time was a young, great power hitting first baseman who was probably going to be an all-star.
Mm-hmm. And he was.
And Billy,
down the line, he was an all-star.
Yeah, hell yeah. He was a really good player.
Mm-hmm.
And then Billy wants to trade him just so his manager, Art Howe, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, can play this Scott Hatteberg. And he doesn't want to play him because, he's not wrong. He's not a great player. He can't play first base. He's not good defensively. He really can't throw and stuff like that. He's not that good at the plate. But Billy's like, he gets on base more. And, he's like, it's like they have like this whole manager GM dynamic where they're very angry at each other. And yeah, Billy starts trading. He trades Carlos Pena away, and that's like a really defying move where he he sticks it to his manager, saying it's my way or the highway. I don't give a
essentially
what you think. I don't care what you think. We're gonna do this my way. And the manager's just like in disbelief because he's like, why are you doing this to me? He's like, I want to have this team to win, but you're not letting me do that. And it's just like it really shows the power dynamic where it's almost like Billy Bean's going ape or something like that. Like he's just going nuts. And I just find that whole sequence interesting.
Yeah.
So, all right. Next scene we're going to talk about is later in the movie when the A's they're in the middle of a 20-game win streak. They're in the middle of a 20-game win streak where they finally catch fire, and they're just on an incredible run. And it's a game where Billy, he's in the car, he's like about to go watch their minor league team look at prospects, and then his daughter's like, turn back, you're not going to jinx it, And then she doesn't even tell him the score, and then he turns the radio on. He's like, the A's are up 11-0 in the fourth inning, and he's like, oh my god, he just turns the car around, and he's at the game, and he's like excited to be back. He's like, I'm not used to watching the game. That's what he's thinking in his head, and then everything just falls apart. They blow an 11-run lead, and they have to get to the ninth inning, and they need to get a hit, and out of all the people that Art Howe calls, he calls on Scott Hatteberg, the guy who he doesn't really like playing at all.
Oh, he absolutely hates him.
Yeah, it's basically Billy's like, diamond in the rough, and he gets in a situation where he hits a walk-off home run, and makes the win streak 20 games. And it's just like an amazing, captivating scene because of how quiet they make it at the end of the game, where it's just like the ball. And then it's just like you hear the fans. It's just like that.
And in my opinion, I think this is like the peak of the movie. Like this is the hero's battle, where it's, they go through a bunch of stuff, and then finally you get your peak. The hero finally wins. I think this movie is less about them making the playoffs and more about them showing the world that they have what it takes to be a winning team. And this scene, with Chris Pratt, with Hatterberg, the person who was down on his luck at the beginning, not able to get anything because he was injured, and then finally, hitting superstardom, and then, having Billy Beane there to be able to see it, sitting in his office because he was too terrified to be out on the field, and just, seeing the entire team celebrate around it. This is that feel-good moment that you see in every single sports movie. We saw it back in Remember the Titans with the championship win. We saw it, you see it in pretty much every single sports movie. This is that peak moment. And I think that this is a beautifully shot scene with the silence as the ball. You only hear the crack of the bat. Yeah. And then, it slowly pans in. The audio slowly rises. And, the commentator's like, oh, my God, they did it. 20 straight wins. The fans are going insane. I think this is a great scene. I think this is a great way to peak the movie, to kind of just highlight it. I think if you see one movie from the scene, it's this scene.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you just said. All right, the last scene that I want to go through before we get into like some nitpicks is it's the very end of the movie. It's after Billy. It's like he's just deciding whether he wants to take the Red Sox GM job, which has way more money to offer him. He's going to get plenty of money to spend.
He's going to be the most paid GM in sports history.
It's almost like his dream job.
Yeah, it's $12,500,000 a year, $500,000 a year, I believe.
Would have made him the highest paid GM in all sports.
Mm-hmm. I believe it was a 5-year contract, if I'm not wrong.
And I think, say this was a year ago, I think he might have taken it.
Oh, yeah.
But I think after everything that they endured this season with all the hardship and all the fight and the resilience that the A's had, I think he's like, you know what? I can't do it. I got to stick to, what I believe in. Even though the Red Sox would have backed him full. And it's funny because they ended up winning the World Series like a year or two later, which is nuts. And, it's interesting because it's like, he turns down such a great job opportunity partially because of his daughter and his family, and then partially because he just loves the job. And that leads to a scene at the end of the movie where he's in the car, he's like listening to the audio tape from his daughter, and it's her singing the song. And it's like, I don't know how to explain like the song. It's kind of about, it's just about like, it's called like Just Enjoy the Show. And it's like about like just living life to the fullest. And she has such a nice voice, so it adds on, and it's like it's very heartfelt. He has like a smile on his face.
It's the first time you see him show emotion in the whole movie.
Yeah,
it's the return to that humanness, because you don't see the humanness unless it's Hatterberg on screen or it's his daughter on screen. And then the minute that you hear the daughter's voice, and it's after everything coming together, they lose in a heartbreaking fashion to the Twins. Yeah. And there's like a beautiful shot of just people leaving the stadium and the lights turning out. And then, he's driving back from Boston, or he's driving
the airport.
Driving the airport.
Yeah.
And this is the return of humanness, and this is the first humanness you see in Billy Beane. Yeah. I think that this is a beautiful way to end the movie. I think it sums up his character beautifully, because finally you get to see him show some emotion other than anger or just straight-faced business.
For me, I agree with a lot of stuff you just said. And I think it's really important because what you see is when he has like a smile on his face because he's so proud and impressed by his daughter. And he should be, because she had an amazing voice and it's just a beautiful song. And then you see it's like him driving by Oakland, the Bay Area, and because that's his home now. It's been his home. And then you see they kind of zoom in to his eyes, and you see his eyes. They don't get sad, but it's almost like it's not smiling. It's like he comes somber. And he's not somber. He's emotional, like you just said. And it almost looks like he's about to cry. And watching and listening to the song in that scene, it's almost like you almost can't help but get emotional yourself, because you special father-daughter relationship.
It's heartbreaking but heartwarming at the same time. And I think
exactly.
And it is an absolute shame that this didn't win at least some sort of Oscar. At least Best Actor for Brad Pitt.
Yes, they showed something. I mean, come on.
His performance in this movie was just shockingly good. Like, and not even shockingly. Like, amazing. He's a great actor, but the way that he's able to like lace his characters in general, even going back to,
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he played a stunt man, but he's like very straight faced, no emotion. He's very good at
Yeah.
doing that, but you
Oh
don't
yeah.
often see the emotional side of Brad Pitt.
Yeah. And I
And
think no. You know
mhm.
what? You keep going. I'll say
Well, I was
something.
just
You
gonna
keep
say
going.
it comes across beautifully subliminally. Like it's not on the surface. It's not like you can see it. Like, oh, he's upset. No, it comes across. You can just see it in his eyes, and it helps you even more. Like it, I dare say that him not crying outright makes the movie end better than him
Yeah.
if he was showing actual emotion, because it sticks to his character. Him crying outright would have been wrong. It would have been like, oh wait, why is he showing emotion out of nowhere? But him showing that small hint of emotion shows that there's still a human in there, and no matter what his background was, he was able to overcome it. And even though he did fall short in the playoffs, he has a good future.
Yeah. And for me, I agree with you. And I just think, as far as Brad Pitt we're talking about here, I just think that the fact that he was the leading man, and I think it's important to think about his performance is so important to the success of the movie, because if he's not that good, the movie's not going to be very good. He has to basically carry this movie on his own. Not that he has to carry it on his own. It's like, yeah, it's like he's the leader. It's like he's like the best player on the team and stuff like that, to give a sports analogy.
Yeah.
And it's just his performance is so important. And he really, I know this is a stupid baseball pun, but he really knocked it out of the park.
Oh, it's fine. It was an okay
And
pun.
yeah, last thing I want to get into is, before we conclude this episode, just a few nitpicks that I wanted to get through. So if people that know this movie, they'll know that there's a lot of scenes where Billy Bean is eating junk food. He eats a lot. He eats like popcorn. He eats ice cream.
Oh, he inhales the peanuts in the office of the Indians
peanuts.
GM.
He eats Twinkie bars. He's eating like, coffee cake. I don't know. Maybe he's eating that, like a bunch of other stuff.
He's just constantly munching.
And he's jacked. It's hilarious. He's in ridiculous shape, probably because he just burns off all the calories. He's like, I'm going to eat all this food, and then I'm going to work out for the entire game. It's nuts. So I just find that hilarious. And this one of the scenes that we didn't talk about, which it's small, but I find it funny, is when Billy is over at his ex-wife's house.
Oh, yes.
To try and see his daughter, waiting for his daughter to pick her up for something, spend time with her. And they're sitting down with her and her current husband, and it's awkward. It's awkward. He noticeably does not want to be there. He's like, get me out of here. And he's got to talk to this guy that's like with his ex-wife, and that's just awkward in general. And the guy, he's trying to like cheer him up about the season, but he knows absolutely nothing about baseball. He's like, you guys lost to Giambini? It's Giambi. It's like I find it funny how much he knows nothing about baseball because of his wife. She married this super macho guy who's into sports, and then she does the exact opposite of marrying a guy who's very zen and stuff like that. And I just find that hilarious.
Yeah.
Another thing that I want to talk about is like, I don't like how the A's, and they portray the A's as like this team that like they have nothing. They act like they have like no good players, and it's impossible for them to be good. They had a young Eric Chavez, from the best third baseman in the game. They had Miguel Tejada, who's from the best power hitting shortstops in all of baseball. They had Tim Hudson, who was a great young pitcher. They had Barry Zito, who was a great young pitcher. And they had Jermaine Dye, who was a very underrated outfielder in baseball for a long time. And I just feel like, it's funny. It's like it's almost like the movie on purpose doesn't want to highlight any of the best players. Like Miguel Tejada has one scene where he tells David Justice where it's like the soda is $1 in the clubhouse. That's really it. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think you can equate that back to though in general in sports movies, you have to build the underdog. Like usually sports movies come about the underdog, like about especially the movie that we saw, remember the Titans, the movie we're going to cover next week, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Movies always have to pretend that there's an underdog. And I think that by them not mentioning it, it kind of helps them, portray them as an underdog, even though like while they are, because they are a small market team, they did have a few very good players. Like I would say some of them were even like all-star worthy. So like, I don't know. I know you're a little bit upset about that. Like you have a little bit of a nitpick with that. I personally don't care about it too much because I think that like, look, they have to be portrayed as an underdog somehow. At least they don't do something as like crazy as when they did for Remember the Titans. My only nitpick was like my main nitpick was that the daughter was featured so heavily, and that the coach had 4 daughters, not one, and the daughters were not that into football. I think that this movie, if that the only nitpick is that they portrayed them too much as the underdog, I think that it's a pretty flawless movie. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know what you think about it. I think that's like the biggest nitpick because like I feel
No,
like you and I have
I
similar
agree.
opinions.
I mean, I love. I think it's nearly perfect. That's how much I
Yeah,
love this movie.
yeah,
And yeah, I think that's really all we got for today.
yeah.
So close one
Okay.
out.
So to close this one up, what are your final thoughts on Moneyball?
I love it. 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 Go if you haven't seen it, and if you've gotten this, I mean, you practically know the entire stinking movie, but go see it. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Despite the fact that we spoiled the whole thing, go see the movie. It's a great movie, and you don't even have to be a sports fan to like it. That's the main thing that I want to portray to people.
Yeah.
It is a sports movie, but it's got a very human and side. It's got a human side to it that I think that people
I
value, and I think
yeah.
that they should go see it.
Okay, I personally love this movie as well for a lot of the same reasons as Jacob. I already stated at the beginning, I love the cinematography. Brad Pitt is incredible. Um, Jonah Hill is absolutely incredible.
Yep.
It's just a great movie. Yeah.
Yep. And
Okay, so next week we're going to cover now my favorite sports movie of all time, and that's Miracle. It's about a Miracle on Ice, the U.S. Winter Olympics hockey team of 1980, and them being one of the biggest underdogs in sports history. I believe that this is the greatest sportscaster call in history, with Al Michaels saying, "Do you believe in miracles?" I'll get more about it later next week. I can go on for hours about that movie, and I don't want to drone on about it. So
yeah.
I'm just going to sum things up. This has been the second episode of the We Love Sports Movies podcast. I've been your host, Matt Blaustein, and I'm joined here by Jacob Aframian. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.